The moment the same coincidence happens often enough, it stops being luck and starts feeling like a warning. Liam Foster never expected his greatest dating problem to have a familiar face. He blamed bad timing at first, then bad chemistry, then terrible algorithms inside every dating application he downloaded. By the time his 11th promising date ended with an awkward apology and a polite handshake instead of a second dinner, even Liam had to admit the universe was becoming strangely creative. He was not asking for a fairy tale. He simply wanted one evening that did not collapse halfway through dessert. His friends insisted he was too optimistic for his own good. His older sister claimed he fell in love with potential instead of reality. Liam usually laughed at both opinions because laughing felt easier than admitting they might be right. Working as a graphic designer at a growing technology company in Seattle kept him busy enough to ignore the empty apartment waiting every evening. But busy was not the same thing as happy. So when Adrian Walker matched with him online and suggested dinner overlooking Elliott Bay, Liam decided he would approach the night with absolutely no expectations. Lower expectations meant fewer disappointments. At least that was the theory. The restaurant overlooked calm water where fairy lights drifted across the bay like floating stars. Warm music filled the dining room, while conversations blended softly beneath the glow of hanging lights. Adrian greeted Liam with an easy smile that immediately dissolved the usual first-date awkwardness. They joked about terrible office coffee, debated whether pineapple belonged on pizza, and somehow spent 20 minutes discussing why everyone secretly believed their own neighborhood bakery made the best cookies in Seattle. Liam caught himself laughing without forcing it. He had almost forgotten how effortless good conversation could feel. Somewhere between the appetizers and the main course, he realized he had stopped checking his phone and stopped waiting for something to go wrong. That hopeful feeling lasted exactly 5 minutes. The restaurant entrance opened quietly, and Grant Sullivan stepped inside carrying a slim leather portfolio beneath one arm. Liam froze with his water glass halfway to his mouth. Of every restaurant in Seattle, on every possible Friday night, somehow his coworker had wandered into this one too. Grant worked in corporate partnerships at the same company. He was composed, intelligent, frustratingly observant, and somehow always seemed prepared for problems before anyone else even noticed they existed. During project meetings, he calmly spotted details everyone overlooked. During presentations, he politely corrected mistakes without sounding arrogant, which somehow made Liam even more irritated. Nobody could possibly be that calm all the time. Adrian noticed Liam staring toward the entrance. "Friend from work?" he asked with an amused smile. Liam sighed. "Coworker." Adrian glanced over again. He looked serious. Liam laughed quietly. "That is probably the happiest I have ever seen him." Grant acknowledged Liam with a brief nod before speaking to the hostess. Nothing unusual, nothing dramatic, just another ordinary moment that should have meant absolutely nothing. Then Adrian's phone buzzed. "Excuse me for 1 minute," he said, standing from the table. "I need to take this outside." Liam watched absent-mindedly through the window while finishing the last sip of his drink. Moments later, Grant also stepped outside. The two men unexpectedly crossed paths beneath the restaurant lights. They exchanged only a few quiet words. Grant remained perfectly composed. Adrian's relaxed expression slowly changed into thoughtful hesitation. Less than 3 minutes later, Adrian returned to the table looking genuinely apologetic. "Liam," he said softly, "you are a wonderful person, but I do not think it would be fair for me to continue this evening." Liam blinked in stunned silence. Before he could ask what had happened, Adrian thanked him, paid for his own dinner, and quietly disappeared into the Seattle night. Liam remained alone beside the window until he noticed Grant walking away without looking back. That was the exact moment Liam stopped believing he was simply unlucky. Someone clearly knew something he did not. Liam spent the entire weekend replaying the same 3 minutes until they no longer felt like memories and started resembling evidence. Grant entered the restaurant. Adrian stepped outside. They exchanged a quiet conversation. Adrian returned with an apology that sounded painfully sincere. Liam had always considered himself a rational person, but rational people were not supposed to witness the exact same impossible sequence over and over again. By Sunday evening, he had invented enough ridiculous explanations to qualify for his own conspiracy podcast. Maybe Grant secretly worked for the dating application. Maybe he had an identical twin wandering around Seattle. Maybe the city was much smaller than anyone admitted. Every theory collapsed almost immediately, yet none sounded stranger than the truth he had actually witnessed. Monday morning greeted Seattle with gray clouds, light drizzle, and the comforting smell of fresh coffee drifting through the office lobby. Liam stepped off the elevator carrying 2 breakfast sandwiches because grocery shopping while hungry remained one of his greatest personal weaknesses. Melissa spotted him before he reached his desk. "Please tell me one of those is for me," she said hopefully. Liam handed one over without hesitation. "Emotional support is expensive." Melissa laughed. "Another bad date." Liam dropped into his chair with exaggerated exhaustion. "At this point, I think the universe has me on a subscription plan." She smiled sympathetically. "What happened this time?" Liam lowered his voice and glanced across the office. "Do you believe one person can accidentally appear everywhere?" Melissa followed his gaze toward Grant's office before looking back. "You mean your favorite coworker?" Liam groaned. "Please do not call him that. You talk about him a lot." "Because he keeps showing up." Melissa raised an eyebrow but said nothing more as the weekly project meeting began. Liam presented a new advertising concept for a nonprofit campaign, explaining color palettes, branding ideas, and community outreach strategies. Everything flowed smoothly until Grant calmly raised one hand. Liam prepared himself for another correction. Instead, Grant politely pointed out that one of the photographs required a different licensing agreement before publication, quietly preventing a legal problem that nobody else had noticed. The room thanked him. Liam thanked him too, although internally he wondered whether Grant possessed some supernatural ability to detect tiny details invisible to everyone else. After the meeting, Liam caught up with him near the coffee station. "Can I ask you something?" Grant looked up from stirring cream into his coffee. "Of course." Liam folded his arms. "Do you ever notice how often we end up in the same places?" Grant considered the question for a brief moment. "We work together." Liam smiled without amusement. "I was not talking about the office." Another quiet pause followed. "You think there is a pattern?" Grant finally said. Liam met his eyes. "I know there is." Grant's expression changed almost imperceptibly, not into guilt or surprise, but into something closer to quiet disappointment. It vanished before Liam could understand it. "Have a good afternoon, Liam," Grant replied softly before walking away. That evening, Liam received a message through a dating application from a man named Connor inviting him to an author event at a small independent bookstore downtown. Liam stared at the invitation longer than he normally would before accepting. As he locked his phone, one thought settled firmly into his mind. If Grant Sullivan somehow appeared at this date too, coincidence would officially run out of excuses. Connor turned out to be exactly the kind of person Liam usually enjoyed meeting. He taught literature at a local community college, collected vintage mystery novels, and somehow managed to make even a conversation about library cards sound entertaining. "Books have personalities," Connor joked as they wandered between tall wooden shelves inside the independent bookstore. "Some of them practically beg you to take them home." Liam laughed. "That is either the sweetest thing I have heard all week or the most expensive excuse for buying more books." They spent nearly an hour browsing shelves, comparing favorite authors, and listening to a best-selling mystery writer answer questions beneath. Warm hanging lights. For the first time in months, Liam realized he had completely stopped waiting for the evening to fall apart. Maybe Melissa had been right. Maybe he had become too suspicious after so many disappointments. Maybe his imagination had quietly taken control. Then the small bell above the entrance chimed. Liam looked up without thinking. Grant Sullivan stepped inside, carrying a hardcover business book beneath one arm. Liam closed his eyes for exactly 1 second before opening them again. Grant was still there. "You have got to be kidding me," Liam whispered under his breath. Connor noticed immediately. "Everything okay?" Liam forced an awkward smile. "Just someone from work." Connor glanced toward Grant. "He looks familiar somehow." Liam sighed quietly. "Lately he seems familiar everywhere." Grant greeted the cashier with his usual calm politeness before walking toward the nonfiction section. He never approached Liam, never interrupted the date, and never behaved suspiciously. Yet somehow he always remained somewhere within sight. First near the business shelves, then beside the travel books, later quietly browsing biographies only 2 miles away. It felt less like coincidence and more like gravity, impossible to ignore no matter how hard Liam tried. Connor eventually excused himself to order coffee from the small cafe inside the bookstore. Liam watched him disappear around the corner. Less than a minute later, Grant walked in the same direction. Liam did not hesitate this time. Keeping several shelves between himself and the cafe, he quietly followed. Hidden behind a display of cookbooks, he witnessed the exact scene he had feared. Connor recognized Grant almost immediately. The two men exchanged a polite greeting before speaking softly for less than 2 minutes. Grant remained composed while Connor listened carefully. There was no visible argument, no raised voices, no dramatic gestures. Only a brief conversation that somehow changed everything. Connor returned carrying 2 paper coffee cups, but the warmth had disappeared from his smile. He placed 1 cup in front of Liam and sat down with obvious hesitation. "I owe you an apology," he said. Gently. "You are genuinely kind, but I realize tonight that I am not ready to begin something meaningful with anyone." Liam stared at him in disbelief. The words were different from Adrian's, yet the ending felt painfully identical. Connor apologized once more, thanked Liam for understanding, and quietly walked away through the bookstore entrance. Liam remained frozen only long enough to see Grant paying for his book near the register. This time he refused to let another unanswered question disappear into the Seattle night. He hurried outside and caught up with Grant beneath the glow of the streetlights. "Enough," Liam called. Grant slowly turned around. His expression remained calm, but concern quietly settled across his face the moment he saw Liam. Liam stopped only a few feet away, breathing harder than expected. "This has happened too many times to be an accident," he said firmly. "Tell me the truth, Grant. What are you really doing?" Grant did not answer immediately. The quiet Seattle sidewalk suddenly felt much smaller as people passed without paying attention to the 2 coworkers standing beneath the warm glow of the streetlights. Liam folded his arms, determined not to let another unanswered question slip away. Grant finally let out a slow breath. "Not here," he said quietly. Liam frowned. "Then where?" Grant glanced toward a small public overlook facing Elliott Bay just across the street. "Somewhere we can finish this conversation without an audience." Every reasonable instinct told Liam to walk away. Instead, he followed Grant across the street in complete silence. They sat several feet apart on a wooden bench overlooking the water while ferries drifted slowly through the harbor. The city lights reflected across the bay in long shimmering lines that somehow made the silence feel even heavier. After several moments, Grant opened the leather portfolio he had been carrying all evening. He removed a thick manila envelope and rested it carefully between them. "Everything inside comes from public records," he said softly. "Nothing illegal. Nothing private beyond information anyone can legally access." Liam looked down at the envelope before meeting Grant's eyes again. "Why would you have information about people I dated?" Grant answered without hesitation. "Because I looked." Liam stared at him. "You investigated them?" Grant nodded once. "Only after something made me uncomfortable." Liam slowly opened the envelope. Inside were neatly organized reports bearing familiar names. Adrian, Connor, others he had met over the past year. Each report contained references to public court filings, professional licensing databases, archived social media activity, and business records. Liam quickly skimmed the first file. Adrian had quietly announced an engagement months earlier through a limited social media audience. Connor had publicly written that he was still emotionally recovering from a previous relationship and was not ready to begin another one. Another report described someone who had falsely claimed professional credentials before those claims were corrected through public records. Liam lowered the papers, stunned. None of it looked exaggerated. None of it relied on rumors. Every detail came from sources anyone could legally verify. "These are real," Liam whispered. Grant nodded. "Yes." Liam looked back at the reports. "You checked every person I tried to build a future with." Grant quietly replied. "I hoped every search would prove my instincts were wrong." Liam shook his head in disbelief. "Why would you do something like this?" Grant remained silent long enough that Liam wondered if he would answer at all. When he finally spoke, his voice carried an exhaustion Liam had never noticed before. "Several years ago, someone very important to me trusted the wrong person. The warning signs were there, but everyone around him stayed quiet because they did not want to interfere. I convinced myself respecting his choices was the right thing to do." He looked toward the dark water stretching across Elliott Bay. "I was wrong. Silence did not protect anyone." Liam listened without interrupting. Grant continued. When I started caring about you, I promised myself I would never ignore obvious warning signs again. I knew you might hate me if you discovered what I was doing. I accepted that because I believed being angry with me would hurt less than being hurt by someone else. Liam searched Grant's face for pride or self-justification, but found only quiet regret. Grant slowly closed the portfolio before speaking one final truth. There was only one thing I never had the courage to investigate. Liam looked at him. Grant smiled sadly. Whether there was ever any chance that you could feel the same way about me. Liam remained on the wooden bench long after Grant's final words faded into the quiet evening air. The envelope rested unopened beside him because somehow the reports no longer mattered as much as the man sitting a few feet away. He should have been angry. Every logical argument told him he had every reason to be. Grant had crossed a boundary, quietly stepped into decisions that should have belonged to Liam alone, and spent months hiding the truth. Yet every document inside the envelope described facts that were publicly available. Every warning had been real, and every uncomfortable conversation had ultimately protected Liam from discovering painful truths much later. Nothing about the situation fit neatly into right or wrong anymore. Grant slowly stood from the bench. You do not have to forgive me, he said quietly. Honestly, I am not sure I would forgive myself. Liam looked up. Then why tell me everything? Grant offered a tired smile that reached his eyes for only a moment. Because once you asked me directly, you deserved honesty more than I deserved comfort. Without another word, Grant walked toward the parking lot, leaving Liam alone with the sound of gentle waves brushing against the shoreline. The following week felt strangely unfamiliar. Grant never approached Liam unless work required it. Meetings became shorter. Conversations became strictly professional. The quiet distance should have made Liam feel relieved. Instead, it followed him everywhere. Monday morning, he instinctively looked toward Grant's office before realizing why. Tuesday afternoon, he bought 2 blueberry muffins from the cafe out of habit before noticing he had no excuse to give the second one away. Wednesday, he almost walked into Grant's office to ask a question about a project, only to discover he already knew the answer himself. This is ridiculous, Liam whispered while staring at his computer screen. Melissa looked over the divider, separating their desks. Talking to yourself again? Liam sighed dramatically. I keep losing arguments with my own brain. She laughed. Those are usually the expensive ones. Later that week, the company organized a volunteer afternoon at a neighborhood community center where employees assembled school supply kits for local families. Liam spent the afternoon sorting notebooks, markers, and backpacks while trying not to notice Grant working across the room. He failed almost immediately. Every few minutes, his attention wandered in Grant's direction without permission. Grant patiently helped an elderly volunteer organize storage boxes, quietly encouraged a nervous high school volunteer who apologized for every tiny mistake, and knelt beside a little girl who could not decide which backpack color she liked most. Instead of choosing for her, he smiled warmly and told her there was no wrong answer if it made her happy. The little girl grinned from ear to ear. Grant simply smiled back and moved on to help someone else before anyone thanked him. Melissa quietly stepped beside Liam, following his gaze without saying anything for a few seconds. You finally see him now, she said softly. Liam lowered his eyes with a small, embarrassed smile. I think I spent so much time trying to understand why he kept appearing in my life that I never noticed who he actually was. Melissa nodded. Most people only notice the loudest person in the room. Grant has always been the quiet one, making sure everyone else is okay. As sunset painted the Seattle sky with shades of gold and blue, volunteers gathered outside beneath glowing string lights. Liam found himself standing beside Grant without either of them planning it. The silence between them no longer felt uncomfortable. It felt familiar. Liam looked toward the city skyline before quietly speaking. I spent months wondering why you kept showing up everywhere. He turned toward Grant with a gentle smile. Now I think the real mystery is why it took me so long to notice that the days you stayed away were the ones that felt the emptiest. Liam looked at Grant for a long moment without saying anything. Around them, volunteers laughed softly while folding tables and carrying empty boxes toward waiting trucks, but the sounds faded into the background as though the rest of the world had quietly stepped aside. Grant smiled with gentle uncertainty. I'm not expecting an answer, he said. You have already been more understanding than I deserve. Liam shook his head. That is the strange part. Grant waited patiently. I thought finding the truth would make everything simple. Liam let out a quiet laugh. Instead, it somehow made everything more complicated. Grant nodded. I know. Liam smiled faintly. No, I do not think you do. They slowly began walking toward the parking lot beneath the warm glow of the string lights. Neither of them seemed eager for the evening to end. Liam glanced sideways. Can I ask you one more question? Grant answered immediately. Anything. Liam looked ahead instead of directly at him. When you were checking those public records, were you secretly hoping to find a reason not to care about me anymore? Grant stopped walking. He thought carefully before answering. Every single time. Liam looked surprised. Grant smiled quietly. Not because I wanted to stop caring. Because I hoped I would discover someone else was a better match for you than I could ever be. Liam frowned. That does not make any sense. Grant laughed softly. Love rarely does. They resumed walking together. I kept telling myself that if one of those men truly made you happy, I would step aside. Grant looked toward the city skyline, glowing beyond Elliott Bay. Your happiness always mattered more than my feelings. Liam felt those words settle heavily inside his chest. He realized no dramatic declaration could have sounded more sincere than that simple sentence. Do you know what I've been thinking about all week? Liam asked. Grant smiled. I have several guesses. Liam laughed. I keep remembering little things I ignored. He counted them on his fingers with exaggerated seriousness. The extra coffee waiting on my desk during late nights. The presentation. Notes that somehow became better after you reviewed them. The meetings where you quietly fixed problems before anyone noticed. Grant rubbed the back of his neck, almost embarrassed. Those were small things. Liam smiled warmly. Exactly. Grant looked confused. Liam continued. I spent so much time looking for dramatic signs that I completely overlooked the quiet ones. They reached Grant's car, but neither of them reached for the door. Liam leaned lightly against the passenger side and folded his arms. You know what finally convinced me? Grant raised an eyebrow. What? Liam smiled. The moment you stopped trying. Grant looked genuinely surprised. Stop trying? Yes. Liam nodded. The second you accepted that I might never choose you, you stopped interfering. You gave me space. You respected my decision before I had even made one. He took a slow breath. That is when I realized you were never trying to control my life. You were only trying to protect it. Grant lowered his eyes for a moment before quietly asking, what happens now? Liam smiled with calm certainty. Now I stop pretending that the person I have been searching for is still out there somewhere. Grant looked back up. Liam laughed softly at himself. Apparently, he has been sitting across conference tables correcting my design presentations for months. Grant covered his face briefly while laughing. Your layouts were excellent. Liam pointed at him with playful accusation. You hesitated. The margins needed work. Liam groaned dramatically before both of them laughed together. When the laughter faded, Liam looked directly into Grant's eyes. How about we begin the next chapter without misunderstandings? Grant's smile grew warmer than Liam had ever seen. I would like that very much. Liam drove home that night with the windows slightly open, letting the cool Seattle air drift through the car, while his thoughts wandered far louder than the quiet music playing on the radio. Every traffic light became another excuse to replay the evening from the beginning. Grant's calm honesty, the awkward laughter about presentation margins, the realization that the man Liam had spent months blaming had never once asked for anything in return. Somewhere between frustration and understanding, the entire story had quietly rewritten itself. By Monday morning, Liam had made one important decision. If this relationship was going to begin, it would begin because both of them freely chose it, not because either of them felt guilty about the past. He arrived at the office carrying 2 cups of coffee without even realizing he had done it until Melissa looked up from her desk with an amused smile. 2 coffees? She asked. Liam looked down at the extra cup and laughed at himself. Apparently my subconscious gets to work earlier than I do. Melissa folded her arms. Should I pretend I do not know exactly who that is for? Liam pointed at her dramatically. You enjoy this far too much. Absolutely. She grinned. It has been months of free entertainment. Liam walked toward Grant's office before his confidence had time to disappear. Grant looked up from a stack of reports as Liam gently placed the extra coffee on his desk. Good morning, Liam said. Grant blinked with quiet surprise. Good morning. Liam shrugged awkwardly. I remembered how you take your coffee. Grant looked at the cup for a second before smiling in a way Liam had never seen inside the office, relaxed, grateful, and wonderfully genuine. Thank you. The smile stayed with Liam for the rest of the day. During lunch, he caught himself watching Grant laugh with another department manager and realized something that made him shake his head at himself. He had spent so much time assuming Grant was emotionally distant that he had completely overlooked how differently Grant behaved around people he trusted. Late that afternoon, the company gathered for a client presentation. Liam stood near the projector while Grant reviewed the final documents one last time. Their eyes met briefly across the conference room. There was no awkwardness anymore, only a quiet understanding that seemed to make everything easier. After the meeting ended successfully, Grant waited until everyone else had left before approaching Liam. Can I ask you something? Liam smiled. I think it is your turn. Grant looked unusually nervous, a sight Liam never expected to witness. On Saturday, when you said we should begin the next chapter, he paused briefly before continuing. Were you asking me on a date? Liam laughed so softly that even Grant smiled. I thought I was being obvious. You were, Grant admitted. I just wanted to make sure I was not imagining it. Liam stepped a little closer, lowering his voice even though nobody else remained in the room. Then let me be very clear this time. Grant waited quietly. Saturday, 7 o'clock. No coworkers. No project discussions. No public records. No pretending this is anything except two people who finally stopped misunderstanding each other. Grant's answer arrived before Liam even finished speaking. Yes. Liam smiled. That was fast. Grant laughed. I have been waiting much longer than one conversation to answer that question. Liam shook his head with playful disbelief. You know something? Grant raised an eyebrow. What? Liam smiled warmly. I spent an entire year searching for the right man. He paused before quietly adding. Turns out the only person who never stopped showing up was also the only one who never stopped caring. Liam arrived at the restaurant 12 minutes early and immediately regretted it, because 12 minutes was more than enough time for his imagination to invent 20 different ways the evening could still fall apart. He adjusted the sleeves of his navy blazer, looked out across Elliott Bay, then quietly laughed at himself. You survived 11 disastrous dates, he muttered under his breath. Surely one dinner cannot be more intimidating than all of those combined. The hostess led him to a table beside the window where city lights shimmered across the calm water like scattered stars. The atmosphere felt peaceful in a way his previous dates never had. There was no pressure to impress a complete stranger because the man he was waiting for already knew his worst presentation habits, his inability to resist bookstore sales, and the fact that he secretly organized desktop icons by color whenever deadlines became stressful. A few moments later, Grant stepped inside wearing a navy sport coat instead of the charcoal business suit Liam saw almost every weekday. Somehow the small change made him look less like an executive and more like the thoughtful man Liam had slowly begun to understand. Their eyes met across the room, and Grant smiled immediately. Liam realized that smile felt strangely familiar, as though it had been waiting for this evening much longer than either of them wanted to admit. I hope I did not keep you waiting, Grant said while taking his seat. Liam glanced dramatically at his watch. Approximately 12 unbearable minutes. Grant looked genuinely apologetic before Liam laughed. I am joking. I was simply too excited to stay home any longer. Grant smiled with visible relief. Good. I was worried you might change your mind. Liam shook his head. After everything we have been through, I think we both deserve one evening without misunderstandings. Dinner unfolded with remarkable ease. They talked about childhood vacations, favorite movies, embarrassing first jobs, and the strange coincidence that both of them had loved the same tiny independent bookstore for years without ever realizing it. Liam admitted he still kept every handwritten birthday card anyone had ever given him because throwing them away felt impossible. Grant confessed he quietly named every plant in his apartment and somehow remembered each watering schedule better than his own calendar appointments. Liam laughed so hard that nearby diners smiled in their direction. Please tell me those plants have respectable names. Grant nodded seriously. One is named Walter. Liam covered his face with one hand. Walter the cactus? Walter the fern. That somehow makes even less sense. Hours passed unnoticed. Neither of them checked a phone. Neither of them looked toward the entrance, expecting another interruption. Liam eventually realized something that made him quietly smile. This was the first date in over a year where he had completely forgotten to prepare himself for disappointment. After dinner, they walked slowly along the waterfront beneath a clear Seattle sky, while ferries crossed the bay in the distance. Cool evening air carried the scent of salt water and fresh rain. They stopped near the railing overlooking Elliott Bay, standing comfortably side by side. Liam looked toward the water before speaking softly. I spent months believing someone kept ruining every chance I had at happiness. He turned toward Grant with calm certainty. Now I understand something completely different. Grant waited quietly. Liam smiled. Those endings only happened because life was patiently refusing to let me settle for the wrong beginning. The person I was searching for never existed at another table, another restaurant, or another dating application. His smile grew warmer as he met Grant's eyes. He was quietly walking beside me all along, and somehow I was the last person to notice. 1 year later, Liam often found himself smiling at memories that once felt like heartbreak. The failed dinners, the confusing coincidences, the unanswered questions, and the endless frustration had quietly become chapters in a story that now made perfect sense. Every ending he once mourned had simply been guiding him toward the beginning he never knew he needed. Monday mornings no longer started with nervous optimism about another first date. Instead, they began with 2 cups of coffee waiting on the conference table, playful debates over marketing campaigns, and Grant calmly reminding Liam that perfectly aligned presentation margins still mattered. Liam insisted they absolutely did not. Grant insisted they always would. Melissa declared that neither of them would ever win the argument because they secretly enjoyed having it too much. The office slowly adjusted to seeing the two of them together. Nobody seemed surprised for very long. Several coworkers admitted they had quietly suspected something long before either of them did. Liam dramatically accused everyone of keeping secrets. Melissa smiled with complete confidence. We were simply waiting for you to catch up. Professionally, almost nothing changed. Liam continued filling projects with creativity and warmth while Grant quietly prevented problems before anyone else noticed them. Together, they became the company's favorite team for community outreach campaigns because their strengths balanced each other. Naturally, one imagined possibilities while the other made sure every possibility could actually succeed. Late one autumn afternoon, they returned to the same neighborhood community center where volunteers once again prepared backpacks, notebooks, and school supplies for local families. White string lights stretched above the courtyard while children laughed between activity tables and parents thanked volunteers with grateful smiles. The evening looked almost identical to the day Liam first realized how much Grant truly meant to him, yet everything felt completely different. There were no misunderstandings left to untangle, no questions waiting for answers. Only quiet happiness built one ordinary day at a time. Melissa eventually appeared carrying 3 cups of hot chocolate before handing one to each of them. She folded her arms with obvious satisfaction. "All right," she announced. "I have waited an entire year to ask this properly. Who actually ruined all those dates?" Liam immediately looked toward Grant. Grant lowered his eyes with an embarrassed smile that made Liam laugh before reaching over and gently taking his hand. Their fingers fit together naturally, as though they had always belonged that way. Several nearby coworkers noticed, smiled warmly, and politely continued their own conversations without making a fuss. Liam finally answered Melissa's question. The person everyone thought was destroying my chances was actually protecting my future. He turned toward Grant before continuing more quietly. He never asked me to choose him. He only wanted me to have the chance to choose the life that was truly right for me. Grant smiled gently. "I still wish I had trusted you sooner." Liam shook his head. "Maybe, but then neither of us would have learned what patience, honesty, and kindness really look like." They stood together beneath the glowing lights, watching families carry backpacks toward waiting cars while the Seattle skyline shimmered beneath the evening sky. Liam realized that love had never arrived as a dramatic surprise or an impossible coincidence. It had quietly appeared in thoughtful conversations, ordinary mornings, shared laughter, difficult truths, and someone who consistently chose compassion even when it was misunderstood. Looking back, every failed beginning had simply cleared the path toward the one person who never stopped believing he deserved something better. Sometimes the happiest ending is not finding someone new at all. Sometimes it is finally recognizing that the person who quietly stood beside you through every disappointment had been home all along.